I can take my little thing off. Let me make sure that's recording. Okay, see, I can be natural with you, so you know I'm doing everything to make sure. Okay, I am going to admit everyone. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's call, Photography 101. We are so excited to see you all here today, whether it's evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. So before we get started, if you guys can go ahead and find the chat box, and if you can write in where you're calling in from, what number event this is, and if you can let us know what your travel photography experience is. Are you a beginner, intermediate, advanced? Drop that in the chat, and this will be a great way for all of us to connect a little bit. So my name is Laura. I am one of the San Diego chapter leaders and one of the TNN virtual event hosts. I have been to many, many events, and I would say I am a beginner with travel photography. So I'm so excited to learn from Preethi today. So this will be wonderful. And before we get to hear from her, I'm going to quickly share my screen and let you know about some things regarding the nomadic network. Oops, one moment. Okay, just one moment. It is blocking, but anyway, so for those of you that are new, the nomadic network is, here we go. Hopefully y'all can see it. The Nomadic Network is a global community of like-minded travel enthusiasts who have come together to learn and support each other to travel better, smarter, cheaper, and longer. So we kicked this off at the end of 2019 and with the hope of having live community events in 22 different cities around the world. We actually had a couple of those, and then it basically turned into the pandemic, and we had to pivot and turn these into virtual events. So these virtual events have been wonderful. We've been able to have such a wonderful variety of speakers on so many different topics come to speak to us. And if you aren't familiar, we have 3 different types of events. So we have travel presentation events, such as the one you're hearing today. We have regional events with regional happy hours, so to speak, and that's a little bit more informal, and those are in different regions throughout the world. And then we have monthly book clubs. So we have these wonderful different events happening, and you can check those all out on the calendar, and I'll talk a little bit more about those at the end. We have a couple housekeeping items to keep in mind. If you don't mind keeping your camera on, please do so. We love to see your smiling faces. I will keep everyone muted for the duration of the call just so we can hear the presenter. And then definitely use that chat box. There are a lot of you on the call, so this is a great place to connect with each other, share your experiences, and then this is where you'll ask your questions. So when you come up with a question, just jot it down, but just make sure you write the word question first, and that way I can find all of them and get your questions answered at the end of the presentation. Just know that our speakers are doing this out of their kindness of their heart, and we are so excited to have Preethi sharing today with us all of her knowledge and wisdom. And then event replays such as this one will be available afterwards to all of our Patreon members. So if this is something you're interested in learning more about, you can head on over to that link there. But basically, this is an exclusive community we have where we have all these wonderful perks that are listed. There are personal stories that Nomadic Matt shares that he hasn't shared before. He brings that to the Patreon group first. There's sometimes live Q&As. There's an exclusive Facebook group. It's just a really great way, in my opinion, to give back to the Nomadic Network, and just an extra way for us to continue learning and growing with the Nomadic Network. So with that, I am so excited to turn it over to our speaker today. So Preethi is the founder of The Eager Traveler. She is an adventure travel photographer, speaker, and writer. And she has a goal and a mission to basically inspire all of us to explore outdoors. So today we are going to go on this virtual tour with her and learn some wonderful photography tips along the way. So without further ado, Preethi, I'll let you take it over from here.
Thank you, Laura. Let me share my screen. I'm super stoked to be here with everybody. Thank you all so much for joining me and giving me this opportunity to just kind of talk about travel and share some of my photos here. So I hope everyone can see my screen okay. And also just a little bit of background about me. I grew up in India until I was 12 years old, and I moved here with my parents to Michigan. And if you're growing up in an Indian household back in the day, the focus very much was on education. So my goal was to, graduate college, get a degree, and then I was expected to go to grad school, get another degree. And then if you were a female, you're expected to get married, and then you had to have babies. And then I think at that point, everybody just left you alone. This was sort of back in the day, my experience. Things have, of course, changed, and they are changing. But growing up in India with that kind of a focus in mind, I wasn't really thinking about becoming a photographer or a travel blogger. I just really wanted to graduate and not disappoint my parents or piss my dad off. So that was really my goal. Fast forward to the United States, I finished college, got my grad degree as well. Corporate America just didn't really agree with me. It didn't speak to me, and I was miserable. So I segued into an agency job, which was really flexible. And I've been working remote for the last 10 years, which has allowed me to create this incredible side hustle of being a travel blogger and photographer. And I can now work with tourism boards and hotel properties on the side on campaigns. So it's been pretty great. And I want to take you on this journey with me. I know I saw some of the responses on the chat window. I know quite a few of you are intermediate, and there are some advanced photographers out there. I wasn't sure about the level, so this is more for beginner photographers. So the intermediate advanced folks, feel free to jump in and correct me if you see something that's really off. But want to kind of start with where I started off. This is how I used to take photos. I really just used to point and click. I didn't think there was anything more to photography than that. I didn't really understand about composition. I did not understand about light and shadows. I just really thought this was phenomenal photography, and I did not understand why Nat Geo wasn't calling me to publish all these amazing photos of mine. So they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? You've all heard this. And a great travel photo tells a story, and it can make the viewer want to be a part of that destination. It makes them want to feel like they're right there with you. And another great quote by Ansel Adams that I often try to think about when I'm shooting is to ask yourself, does this make me feel something? Will it make the viewer think something? So next time before you shoot, try to think of what you're trying to convey, what story you're trying to convey through your photo. So if you look at this photograph, it's not the best. The eyes are not very clear. My shutter speed was way off when I took this photo many years ago in Indonesia, in Borneo. But this photo, does it make you feel something? Does it make you think something? For me, this photo makes me feel sad. It makes me feel sad knowing how we've destroyed 80% of the orangutan's habitat. And just looking at the expression on his face, the way he's looking back at those of us standing behind the foliage, it's almost as if to say, haven't you humans had enough? You've destroyed so much of my home already, isn't it enough, right? So it's you're kind of trying to tell these kind of stories to your viewer. So what exactly is travel photography, right? Well, travel photography is documenting your own travel experiences. So you could be photographing wildlife, you could be photographing landscapes like this. This is a shot taken at Yosemite National Park at sunrise on the right, and a cute little A-frame cabin at the same national park. You could be photographing street scenes. So this is an Agori sage that I came across in Nepal after my base camp trek to the Annapurna mountain range. And basically, these are a set of people that focus or engage on post-mortem rituals. They're a little controversial, but they're mainly found near cemeteries. And you can find many of them in Nepal as well as India. And this is a street scene in Vietnam. You might want to tell a story around this. For example, the photo on the right, you might want to talk about or show the details of how Vietnamese women might be dressing, what their accessories might look like, or what a street vendor might be wearing even. So that could be an example of a street shot. Now, you might also want to take photographs of architecture. If you're going to a country like Iran or Uzbekistan, you are going to be assaulted with grand architecture, huge buildings, and your challenge is to somehow bring out the detail in some of these buildings that you're seeing. So that's kind of, with travel photography, it really encompasses all genres. So if you can get comfortable at developing your skills, you can be confident in taking great photos in any genre and say yes to any assignment, regardless of the subject or location. Now, these are tips that have really helped me level up my photography in the last couple of years. So I want to kind of show you in the next few slides how I used these tips to compose my photos. But I want to say that there's no substitute for practice and for consistency. Honestly, because I was stuck here in California last year, I think just to kind of keep my sanity and to get through last year, I went out almost every week to photograph something or the other. And basically I was in the outdoors almost every week. And so what you're about to see is a result of that consistency and that learning. So kind of let's take a look at this tip. I'm sure a lot of you, especially the intermediate and the advanced photographers here, have heard of this. It's called the rule of thirds. And let me see if I can, okay, perfect. So the rule of thirds basically requires you to take an image and break it into 3 equal parts, either vertically, horizontally, or both, and then place key compositional elements into those thirds. So here is, what is going on? I'm trying to move my slide. Let me see if this works. Okay, that works. All right. Okay, so here is an example of how that looks. So whether you're shooting with a camera or your phone camera, you should be able to turn on the grid line. So I'm using the Sony a7R III, for example. Just go to the menu on your camera, find the tab up here that contains the grid line. So in the Sony a7, it's going to be the tab 2, the second tab. Scroll down until you find grid line, click into that, and then select the rule of thirds grid, which is going to give you this view every time you're trying to shoot something. So with this, what you want to do is you want to place your subject into those thirds or these intersection points right here. Okay, so I'm trying to, the subject here that I'm trying to shoot is the candle. So what I want to do is place that candle at one of these intersection points. Now, I know that this is a little counterintuitive, but the viewer's eyes naturally tend to go to one of these intersection points much more naturally than the center, which is why if you want to create a less static photo, they say to kind of off-center your subject and do what I did here with the candle. Okay, so if you're shooting with a phone, I use an iPhone sometimes, and I have the iPhone 11, just go to settings, go to camera, you can select the grid, and you'll have that every time you shoot something. So it kind of helps you compose your shot. So here's an example of how I composed a shot in Death Valley National Park a couple months ago. I wanted to show these beautiful painted dunes called the Artist's Palette, and I wanted to put a person there to also show scale. I'm a huge fan of, kind of putting people in my shots to show how small and insignificant we are compared to the surroundings around us. So in this situation, I could have put the person here on the right, I could have put them at the left intersection point, or any of these bottom intersection points, and I chose to put them here on the right for this final shot. Again, I know it says rule of thirds. Rules are, kind of meant to be broken as well. So don't be afraid to break that rule. Here, the person has been placed in the center of the shot because if I were to place the person to the right or the left, the trees in the background are going to kind of just crop up above the person's head, and it's not going to be the most appealing shot. So visually, you also want to see what's appealing for you and what you're feeling. A lot of photography is also how you're feeling. So don't be afraid to kind of also break some of these rules, but yet use that as a guidance. This is also a little bit off-centered. It's not exactly following the rule of thirds, but I think the leading line over here kind of engages the viewer to kind of, focus on the subject and then more towards the larger landscape. So I think it's a shot that still works. In this photo, again, I've used the rule of thirds and I'm focusing more on the sky. Because I had a really dramatic sky, I chose to kind of position my horizon on the lower third and then focus more on the sky. So when I talk about the lower third, I'm talking about this bottom portion first. So that kind of also helps with composition and gives you an idea of how you can kind of play around with composition in a shot. Now, for example, if you had like a building here that you were trying to really focus on, and it was a gorgeous building, there was nothing much that was happening with the sky, right? You're looking at a really plain sky, no big deal, nothing fantastic, but there's a beautiful building here. Then you want to shift this so that your focus is less on the sky, so you don't have as much sky in the shot, but it's more focused on the building. So the other tip that I really enjoy looking for when I'm out trying to compose a shot are leading lines. They're very common. A lot of people use them in photography to draw the viewer's eye towards a specific point of interest. So the next time you're out, shooting something, try to think of a leading line around you. It could be anything from a path to railway tracks to a river. Basically, you're trying to create a visual journey from one part of the photo to the other. So here, this is what I'm trying to do. It was shot with a phone, and I'm literally trying to draw the viewer's eye from this part of the photo in the front all the way through to the back almost, kind of creating this visual journey for them. Same thing here. This is actually a great area in San Francisco in the Presidio. It's called Lover's Lane. It's actually an art installation by a world-renowned artist called Andy Goldsworthy. And it kind of invites the viewer to sort of contemplate, perhaps where does the life of a tree really begin? The fertile earth. That's kind of what he intended. And you could almost even place a subject at the end of this leading line to kind of draw the viewer's attention there. And in this case, I'm trying to just focus the attention towards these trees. Here's another example of a leading line. I recently shot this photo in Death Valley National Park. And the objective here is to draw my viewer in and upward all the way to that solitary cloud up there. Sometimes you also have to go with your feeling. And when I saw this landscape, I just knew that this was the shot that I wanted. So I placed a person up there to show scale and had them climb this gigantic sand dune. Here's another example of a leading line shot at Yosemite National Park. Now, this shot could be very different if you just take it at eye level. But here, what I actually did was I crouched down and I positioned my lens in such a way that it was really close to the ground. And I took the shot from that perspective. I'm trying to visually lead the viewer all the way out here to the iconic half dome here in Yosemite, and placed a person there for scale, but had them jump also to kind of, show that joyfulness at being outdoors, right? Given everything that we went through last year, every moment of being outside was joyful. And that's what I was trying to share with this photo. And like I said, leading lines can also be a river. And in Zion National Park, I found this scene where I could actually lead the viewer through this river to this gorgeous sunset and have them notice all the other details of this beautiful canyon. Composition is, really just how the elements of a photo are arranged. Back in the day when photographers often used to say, hey, so what comp are you looking for? Or, think about your composition. I had no clue what they were talking about. But composition is really how many different elements do you want to put in your photo to help make that photograph more or less interesting. So if you take a look at this photo, I chose to put very few elements in this photo. It's almost a minimalistic photo. There's not a whole lot that's going on there. And sometimes that can be really appealing. So when you're out there photographing, think about how you want to compose your photo. What elements do you want to put in there, given the story that you're trying to tell? So with this one, I shot with my iPhone. I was out backpacking in Yosemite National Park. I just didn't want to take my camera. My backpack was already too heavy. So I only had my phone to work with. And I was trying to showcase the incredible sunset that was out here. I also wanted to tell a story about how amazing it is camping out with such a view. And so I kind of used the rule of 2/3, and this is what rule of thirds, and this is kind of the shot that I got. It's not the best in terms of composition, perhaps, but does it tell a story about camping and the outdoors and beautiful sunsets? Yeah, it does. Here's another example of how you can compose a shot. Again, I like to use scale a lot, so I put a little person up there to kind of show the surrounding dunes in Death Valley National Park. I composed the shot using a wide angle lens because my focus was really on trying to capture the sun flare. So there's so many different ways to compose a shot like this. I'm a little obsessed with sun flares because I found them really, really hard when I was first getting into photography. And now I find them so easy that I just want to put them in every photo that I can. The shot for me, the story that I'm trying to tell is it's almost something that pays homage to my childhood days where I used to be a voracious reader and I used to read Enid Blyton a lot. She was a children's author, very prevalent in India. I don't think she's that popular here in America, but she always used to write about these enchanted woods and these magic faraway trees and a wishing chair that could fly. And she always talked about magic and elves and gnomes running around. And so for me, this forest kind of brings out my childhood, brings out the magical enchanted woods. And that was kind of the story that I was trying to tell with that particular image. All right, so this is the iconic Golden Gate Bridge here in San Francisco. This is a shot where we used photo pills. I was with my friend and we decided, hey, we saw another photo where we saw that the sun was actually going to be passing through one of the windows of this bridge. And we thought, all right, let's try to find a composition like that. And we used an app called PhotoPill. So my friend actually came out the day before to scout the area, and she realized that the sun was actually going to be popping out through this top, the first window of the bridge. And so we came back the next day and just shot the scene. So the composition here could be very different if I didn't have the sun flare, right? It would still be a pretty photo, but I think having that sun flare in here just kind of, adds a little bit of more context and is a little bit more interesting as well. So when you're composing a shot, like I said, you're not always going to be following the rules, right? I certainly didn't follow the rule of thirds here because it's almost a shot that's the bush is almost centered. But when I saw this on the Mesquite Sand Dunes in Death Valley National Park, I just knew that this was the shot. I just went with my instinct. And the story that I'm telling here is what I felt last year going through the pandemic. I felt shades of darkness. And I felt a lot of happy moments as well. I also felt really alone. And for me, this photo really just speaks to that. And so I titled it The Survivor. I didn't know if it was a great photo or not at that time, but I think the judge felt the same way because this actually won an award at a photo competition recently. We already talked about this photo. So when I was composing this photo in Morocco in 2019, just before the pandemic, I just wanted to capture the grandeur of the beautiful Grand Mosque in Casablanca. There was a kid that popped into my photo, which I thought was great for scale because it shows you how big the gate and the facade actually is. But what really bothered me about the composition was these lines, and I couldn't do anything about them because that's how it is. It's not maybe the best photo. I don't know what a judge would say about this photo, but it's just an example of, how you could possibly compose this with a kid that kind of walks into your photo. Some ways to kind of, think about that. I composed the shot with my phone when I was in Morocco, again, right before the pandemic. I was on a really amazing girls trip when I was freelance travel writing for a company called Akenala Expeditions, and this was our annual trip. So we went to Morocco, we went to this beautiful town called Chefchaouen. I don't know if some of you have been there, but it's a magical town. Everything is painted blue. The alleys are blue, the shops are blue. It's just mind-boggling. So we stepped into this restaurant for lunch. And we all saw this view out of that big terrace and we all gasped. It was amazing. So I didn't have my camera on me for some reason, but I whipped out my phone and I said, all right, I got to capture this. The first shot is what I took. And I wasn't really happy with it because it wasn't trying to capture the essence of what I wanted to really get with this photo. And I had all these distracting, trees, greenery that I didn't really want in my photo, right? I just wanted to show the blue houses. So I changed my angle and I took the second shot. It's not bad, but it still isn't trying to convey all those blue homes that I was seeing on the hillside. So I shifted my position a little bit. And the third shot is what I went with, because this kind of fully not only fills the frame, it kind of gives you an idea of all the different homes that are layered up on the little hill. You can even see a little bit of detail here, like the rooftops and clothes that are hanging out to dry and so forth. So you don't have to have a fancy camera to take good photos. You can even just use your phone and just use some of these tips consistently and practice, and you can still get a great photo. A lot of photographers enjoy using a foreground to take, to compose a photo. So the foreground is really the portion of the frame that is closest to the camera. Now you can either blur the foreground, drawing attention to the background of the photograph, or vice versa, or keep both foreground and background crisp. The reason that you want to use the foreground is sometimes to set context and even add depth to the photo. So for example, you might want to just photograph an image of the sunset over the sea, which is fine. But you could add some depth or context by maybe using some flowers in your foreground or even adding a person. So I kind of like to use foreground a lot in my shots, especially when there's nothing else happening around in the sky. I went to the Golden Gate Overlook one day. There was not a whole lot going on in the sky. It was just the Golden Gate Bridge. The colors weren't really popping. But I saw these flowers nearby and I thought, all right, I'm going to use that as a foreground and kind of try to create a little bit additional depth. It's not the best. I would have preferred some of these flowers to kind of actually just popped up a little bit more. I blurred it a little too much, but that's an example of how you can use foreground. Same thing on the right. I saw some greenery out here and I said, all right, let me use that to frame the shot to kind of add a little bit more interest. This is the Meckway Falls in Big Sur here in Northern California. The coastline is really pretty. The falls are really popular. It's great for sunset. But because there was nothing happening that evening, the sky was just pretty flat, I chose to zoom in and kind of focus on the waterfall. But it's a pretty small waterfall and I wanted to add something a little bit more interesting. And so I chose to kind of frame it this way using that foreground. I did the same thing here. Again, I kind of blurred my foreground a little bit and I try to focus using my telephoto lens to really capture some of the details around this beautiful town called San Miguel de Allende, which I think this photo was also recently featured in Travel and Leisure or Condé Nast, I believe. So that's another example of how you can use foreground to kind of, go from a very static shot to something a little bit more interesting. I'm using my phone here. And if you put your phone, especially if you're using iPhone, you could even put that in portrait mode and you can kind of do the same thing with foreground. So a little bit of experimentation. I was here on assignment with Visit Germany, the tourism board, and I was just hanging around eating a pizza for lunch and just experimenting. I wanted to draw focus and attention to the architecture here. So I blurred out my pizza. But on the shot here to the right, I wanted to actually focus on the cupcakes because they were probably the best cupcakes I've eaten. And they were also really pretty looking compared to what was going on in the background. Another tip that I really like to use when I can is framing. So framing just refers to the technique of drawing focus to the subject in the photo by blocking other parts of the image with something else in the scene. I don't have an opportunity to use framing a lot, but in San Francisco, sometimes it's interesting because you'll find things like this, like a barbed wire. So I kind of experimented a little bit where, some of these other elements down here aren't really that interesting. The viewer doesn't really need to see it. But the minute I kind of use that as a frame, I'm directing my focus more towards the bridge and what's happening over here. So that's one way to use framing. Here I'm using the tent, the window, the opening of the tent to kind of invite my viewer into my tent and to sunrise, to kind of view sunrise with me. This was shot at Yosemite National Park when I was backpacking a couple months ago. So here's another way that you can also use framing. You could use the walls around you, the canyon walls around you here at Bryce Canyon National Park, to kind of draw attention to something else. So I really wanted to, draw the viewers' attention here to the people that were hiking down there, and then further up to the hoodoos that are really, the main draw here at Bryce. And here what I've done with framing is I'm using the tree as my frame. Ideally, it would be great if you could like kind of chop this part off and try to use both trees as a frame to kind of draw the viewer's attention into the Golden Gate Bridge. The other technique is also filling the frame. So this works great if you have wildlife, if you've got, any other subject that you want to kind of focus in on. I only had this cabin out there, and I still think it's a great story because it kind of makes me want to go out here and stay in that cabin, right? And this was shot during fall last year at Mammoth Lakes, but this also works great if you're, shooting wildlife, for example. This is something to kind of think about when you're out there on safari. If you can, sort of fill the frame with some greenery and isolate just the wildlife, just the animal, it could be a really powerful shot as well. So another tip that I use sometimes, and I used extensively when I visited Uzbekistan right before the pandemic, is symmetry. So in a symmetrical photograph, the image is equally balanced if it's split down the middle. Symmetry is a powerful tool because it lets you create harmony, which is very, very appealing. So try this exercise, for the beginners out there. If you're not used to symmetry and you don't understand what that means, over the next few weeks, just look around, every room in your house or when you go outside, and try to look for something that could have a vertical line of symmetry. It could be window frames. It could be maybe the backrest of your dining chairs. You can even combine symmetry with people, and reflection from a lake is also symmetry. So when I went to Uzbekistan, I went to this city. I went to Tashkent, and the subway station there is one of the most beautiful subway stations I've ever seen. And almost everything in Uzbekistan is extremely symmetrical. And so you kind of want to do justice to that. And yeah, I could have positioned the person, using the rule of thirds over to the right, sure. But I opted for that symmetrical shot where I lined her up to almost follow this invisible line through the ceiling. And same thing here. So the mosque in Bukhara in Uzbekistan, it's a beautiful mosque. You've got, some just incredible symmetrical architecture. And so the figure here is positioned perfectly in line all the way up here through the photo. If you split this photo right in the middle, it's going to be a perfect balance. The bench in the back is not symmetrical, but the person is symmetrical here. So you have a lot of opportunity in places like Uzbekistan, places like Iran, where you can play around with symmetry, and you can either shoot with a person, without a person. Again, showing scale here with such large buildings is really interesting to kind of see, how huge these buildings really are. So what I did with this photo on the left was I actually cropped it down, and my final result is the one on the right. So this was shot in Germany when I went there on assignment, and I shot the photo on the right with my tripod, and then I cropped it down to kind of give it a little bit more of a tighter composition. Again, another shot of symmetry in Morocco. And finally, I want to talk about storytelling. So as a travel photographer, what we're trying to do is capture anything that tells a story. And that could be landscapes, that could be culture, people, food, celebrations, architecture, just about anything, right? So you want to take photos of people that, that are participating in an activity, eating, playing. You want to try to capture color, taste, movement, texture, and even play around with perspective. So try and get down low, shift your angles. And I think we're very, very used to shooting at eye level. And it takes some practice to try and, kind of scoot down a little bit lower, tilt your camera lens up. Like I can show you in one of these examples here. For this shot, I actually crouched down low and I tilted my wide angle lens up to capture the shot, kind of showing you how huge these trees actually are. This was shot at the Calaveras Big Tree State Park in Northern California. They're known for the giant sequoias. And it's hard to show scale if you are going to shoot this at eye level, right? It's virtually impossible. So do a lot of research. I actually make a list of places that I want to explore and shoot on my trip, and look for opening times, look at weather conditions, lighting conditions, etc. In Uzbekistan, I actually ended up looking for opening times, and I realized a lot of these places opened up at like 9 or 10 a.m. when the tourists are going to be, within the places and really like packing up the spots, making it really hard to take the photographs. And the lighting conditions are going to be much more harsh than I would like. So I actually ended up going out there way earlier, like around 7 a.m. and trying to see where I could shoot. And it was perfect because there were no tourists in the morning. You also want to try to scout out a place and try to just find, record like your first impressions, right? So when you get to your destination, don't just immediately start trying to, take photos that you've seen somewhere online or on Instagram. Not all your shoots need to be pre-planned. Some of them can also be candid, but you kind of want to just look around you, just see how you're feeling, what your first impressions are, take notes on that maybe just a little bit, and then come back and shoot if something has really caught your eye. So one of the biggest tips for me last year was to wake up early morning and shoot without people and where the light was the best. So sunrise and sunsets often give you the best light. So if you can go an hour before actual sunrise and go an hour before actual sunset and then stay like an hour later, the light is amazing and you can get all kinds of lightings to play with. So that's kind of the tip I would say, especially if you're shooting, landscape photography. For street photography, I think it's a little different. So some examples of storytelling. So this was shot in Morocco. For me, the story is, I was just walking by on the street and I saw this scene, and it's a lot about, young and old, or modern versus traditional. They're wearing the traditional clothes, and she's using a phone, and there's a youngster who's just, hanging out. So that was kind of an interesting photo for me. This one here was shot in San Francisco. And I just I put this in here to kind of show you that I'm using, I'm kind of crouched down low and I tilted my lens up to take the shot because I really wanted to capture the entire house. And a wide angle lens was perfect for this. I also didn't want to cut off the winding staircase and the beautiful arch showcasing this house, which I felt was really, really nice and kind of one of the nicer things about this place. So in this shot, taken in Uzbekistan, I was invited to the home of a family. By the way, in Uzbekistan, if you're Indian, they love you because they grew up watching Bollywood movies and they love Indian people. So I've never felt more welcome than I did when I was traveling through Uzbekistan. And as a result, I got invited to so many people's houses. And yes, this was pre-pandemic. So I didn't think twice about, joining people who invited me for lunches and dinners or whatnot. But these women were really amazing. They invited me to their house. And you can see here, she's preparing her kitchen. She's lighting a fire because she's getting ready to cook a meal. So her excitement is obvious. And you can kind of see some of the traditional clothes also that she's wearing. As a continuation of that photo, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to show you her sisters who are in the kitchen preparing this meal. You can kind of see the steam rising here in the back. In the left photo, what she's actually doing is she's preparing the bread that you can see here in the shot. So it kind of gives you a little bit of insight into, the culture, their clothes. You can kind of get an idea about textures, some kind of movement here with the fire. So these are some kind of, interesting travel stories that you can tell beyond just landscapes, depending on where you're traveling. So especially if you're going to places like, Central Asia or Southeast Asia, you've got a lot of, even Europe, you have a lot of street photography or photographs in markets that you can really focus on. This isn't the best composed, not a great shot in terms of focus, but it's kind of symmetrical. You know, if you split this photo down the middle, you'll get a nice balance. And I just really like this for the two ladies. I thought they were, you know, just super cute. I love their attitude. I've never seen anything like this in the States. And I thought it was just a very, very interesting part of the culture for me to see and show in a country like Uzbekistan. So going back, I want to talk a little bit about this photo. The story here is all about, you know, the trinkets and souvenirs that you can find in Morocco. It shows you a little bit about the cultural aspect of it. Kind of wish I'd bought that right now. I'm just like noticing this now when I look at this photo. I don't understand why I didn't buy it, but kind of just gives you an idea of, you know, what you could find in a store in Morocco if you wanted to shop for something local. Food is a great way to, you know, show a culture, show a different destination. It's also a fantastic way to kind of connect with people from a different country, right? So in Uzbekistan, this is how they eat. They kind of all share this bread that's kind of in the middle of the table, and then they have all these different appetizers that they make. And it was just really interesting that we were able to bond and we were able to, you know, kind of get to know one another, even though we didn't understand each other's language and we all had very different cultures. So food is a great way to kind of establish that communication, that connection. And it's a way to draw the viewer in to that destination. If they can't be there with you, this is a great way to kind of share with them what a meal could look like, perhaps in a country like Uzbekistan. So what kind of story, you know, are you getting from some of these shots? So the one on the left, for example, was also shot in Uzbekistan when I was just kind of walking down the street. And for me, the story here is just really, you know, being able to get a glimpse of daily life, to see how kids look. I think before my trip to Central Asia, I didn't know a whole lot about Central Asia. And I suspect a lot of us in America, we don't. We were not really exposed to it. And I didn't really understand the difference between Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. I visited all of these countries. So it was really interesting for me to tell the story because I wanted to just show, you know, these kids, this girl who was super interested in us, holding our cameras, and she was so curious. She came out to see this little cutie over here, just seeing what they're wearing, kind of get a glimpse of what's happening inside, what a house could possibly look like. The photo on the right was also shot in Uzbekistan. And this is a complex filled with tombs of royalty. It's one of the most beautiful complexes that I have ever visited in my life in Samarkand. I don't know if any of you have been to Samarkand in Uzbekistan, and you'll know what I'm talking about. And there are these ladies that were standing here all admiring this tomb, the entrance to this tomb. And this story for me conveys heritage, culture, and this was published in, I want to say, Travel and Leisure Southeast Asia a few years ago. It was super exciting to see one of my photos published in print for a magazine like that. So that's kind of the story that I get from looking at a photo like this. So I think this is kind of a, you know, really cool story here that's going on. You can see a bunch of ladies here in Uzbekistan. They're all laughing and giggling. My hand, that's me sitting there. My hand is on this lady's knee. And again, once again, this story here is so powerful because I think it shows the camaraderie, the, you know, how we can kind of overcome our language barriers, cultural barriers, and you can still get to know people. I think we were able to communicate our names. We were able to communicate if we were married or not, whether we had children or not, and had a really good time doing it. And this is a kind of a different set of stories here. I chose these photos just to show you, you know, it depends on what kind of travel photographs also that you want to take. This was when I was in Sri Lanka. I was on assignment for a luxury hotel property here in Yala National Park. And so this is a story more about the property and kind of just a lifestyle shot, just kind of showing that, hey, yeah, we're hanging out. We're really just enjoying this place and kind of inviting the viewer to kind of think about, oh, what is this cool structure? Like, what kind of a place is this? This looks kind of cool. I might kind of want to go experience that. And then on the right, kind of giving the viewer a glimpse into Sri Lanka, into a train ride that I took, and kind of looks, kind of dark and mysterious. And the bottom right picture, waiting for a train to come through. So it looks very green, very lush, kind of giving the viewer a little bit of sense into what Sri Lanka might be like. So these kind of travel stories are, they're really fun to shoot and share. If you're into food photography, I'm sure you do a much better job than I do, but I simply just wanted to take the shot in Vietnam because this was one of my favorite dishes that I had been having when I was in Hanoi. This is kind of a fish, it's a delicacy actually that's only, I think, served in Hanoi, if I'm not mistaken. And they basically paired it with a couple of condiments here, some vermicelli noodles and some of these greens. And I kind of like shooting from the top down to kind of give it this very clean look where the focus is just entirely on the food. And on the right is a very delightful Moroccan street vendor. Street photography can be a lot of fun. This isn't exactly a phenomenal photograph, but it's a good story. He didn't even charge us, by the way, for those sesame seed biscuits. He was just such a friendly person, so welcoming, so inviting. Couldn't really speak our language, but was very, very happy to share some of the food that he had made. And you can kind of just see that joy in his face come through. So if you want to take outdoors photos, they also tell great stories. And I focused a lot on landscape photography and outdoors photography last year simply because I was just here and that's what I did. So the story on the right for me is just all about adventure and exploration, right? It's this cool structure here. This happens to be a slot canyon in Utah, and it makes me want to just go and adventure and go climb into a slot canyon and explore. The photo on the left, again, is kind of inviting the viewer to explore, to adventure, to kind of see what's out here. And this isn't some far off destination, right? It looks exotic. It looks like it could be Jordan or Egypt, perhaps, with the sand dunes, but it is over in Utah in the US. And if you're dialing in from somewhere outside of the United States, yes, it's a pretty far off destination then. But for most of us here in America, this is right here in Utah, but it creates a very, very mysterious story. It kind of makes you feel like you're in some kind of a dream sequence almost. What about this photo? What kind of story does this, what does this make you feel? What does this make you think? For me, this photo, once again, is about adventure. It's about exploration. I want to see, what is she looking at? What is up there? And I kind of feel like it could be like an open sky, perhaps, and maybe there's like a hole up there. It also makes me curious as to what's further inside here. How far does the slot canyon really extend back there, right? So those are some things that I think about when I look at photographs like this, and it invites me to want to go. It invites me to want to know more. So you don't always have to just story tell through street photography. You can story tell through any kind of a genre, really. So that's kind of, the photography part of it. This is more about the technical aspects. The number one question that I get asked is, what camera do I use? There are a lot of intermediate, advanced folks out here who feel free to chime in. I just want to say something. A lot of people ask me. I used to ask a lot of people this, like, hey, what camera are you using, or what lens are you using? Like, I love your photo, and I want to just replicate that. But great photos are less about the camera, and they're really about the photographer. It took me a long time to learn this, because I'm not a patient person. And if I want to be good at something, I want to be good at it overnight. And that is impossible with photography. Consistency is what's going to pay off. And I literally went out and I shot every week last year. And that is how I improved. So my journey started from a disposable camera for my very first international trip to Kenya. Yes, I went on a wildlife safari in Kenya and I had a disposable camera. I literally want to cry just saying this out loud, but that's how I started. I've never been back to Africa. Well, I've never been back for a safari. So all the wildlife photography that I captured in Kenya, they're sitting in a little album and they're really awful, but that's how I started. And then I graduated to a Canon Rebel XDI. Then I went over to the Sony A7000 and finally the A7 R3. But I've always, even with the Canon Rebel, I could have taken amazing photos. I just never knew how to really take photos. That's actually the honest truth. So what I've written up here on the screen in terms of best mirrorless travel camera or value travel camera or compact travel, these are just based on some research online. Do your own research, talk to people. I noted down some of the top budget travel cameras out there by some magazines, and a lot of people like the Panasonic, a lot of people love the Olympus. You've got the big brands like Nikon and Canon. They're old timers, they've been around, they understand the technology, they've got a wide variety of lenses. So they're great, but definitely do your research if you're out there in the market for a camera. All right, and then the second most popular question that I get asked is, what lens do you use? So my go-to lens is honestly, and very probably surprising for a lot of the intermediate advanced people, would be the 70 to 300 mm. That's just my preference. It's called a telephoto or zoom lens because I can zoom all the way up to 300 to take shots like this. And shots like this are absolutely captivating for me. The mountain looks super close, but I was nowhere near this mountain. I was way back somewhere else, but having that focal length helped me capture this shot. So I don't know if you guys remember that very first photo that I showed you from when I first started taking photographs. It was a road shot in a car and some mountains. Well, I've come a long way since then. But the shot is really inviting, right? Because it kind of invites the viewer to want to get on a road trip after seeing this and explore. This was shot in, I want to say, somewhere down in Nevada, and it wasn't Alabama Hills, which is in California, and it's not the Valley of the Fire either. It's the Red Rock Canyon, just about 30 minutes outside of Vegas. Okay, so that's kind of why I love the 70 to 300. This was also shot on my 70 to 300. I was at the Mesquite Sand Dunes in Death Valley National Park. I was kind of standing a little bit far off, but using that focal length between the 70 and the 300 allowed me to capture this line, the person standing there, and these beautiful layers that keep, extending way out into the sand dunes. So the 16 to 35 is what's known as the wide angle lens. You've got the ultra wide angle, which I think goes down to like 10 or 11 mm. But what I have is the 16 to 35. So it's known as a wide angle, and it's honestly great for landscapes. I've got the f2.8. This is also known as the aperture. I'll talk a little bit about the settings if people are interested in a couple minutes. But basically, this is a fantastic landscape lens, but it also is great if you want to shoot people in the landscape and kind of blur out the background a little bit. It's really great for that. I like the 16 to 35 to take photographs like this. It also allows me to capture sun flares like this. You can capture sun flares with other lenses, but I've noticed that a 16 to 35 does it the best. So I kind of tend to use it more to try to get shots like this and to make something like a rock like this look a little bit more interesting. So this was shot in Joshua Tree National Park. It's the Arch Rock Trail. And if you get here at sunrise, this is the treat that'll await you. The 85 mm is, the 85 and the 50 are what's known as fixed lenses because they don't zoom in and out. That focal length is just fixed. They are at an f-stop or aperture 1.8, and it's beautiful for taking portrait photography. I don't do a lot of portrait photography. However, I do have the 50 mm. I rarely use it. The 85 is also great. I see a lot of wedding photographers use it, and their shots just come out incredibly well. This was taken by a friend of mine with an 85, and as you can see, the person is just really crisp, and the background is beautifully blurred. So it's a really great lens if you want to kind of focus on that kind of photography. The 24 to 70 is your all-purpose lens, and it at an f-stop of 2.8, it's beautiful. You can take portrait photos with this, you can take landscape photos with this, and you can even kind of get into telephoto with the 70 focal length, right? I don't have this lens and I do want to get it because I often find myself complaining that I'm stuck between the 70 to 300 and the 16 to 35. What I really need is something like the 24 to 70. But honestly, if you talk to a lot of travel photographers, they'll tell you that this is their go-to lens. If you want one lens that you want to use and not spend a whole lot buying all these different lenses, a lot of people will argue the 24 to 70 is a phenomenal lens, or even the 16 to 35. With the 16 to 35, however, you will not be able to take compression shots like this, where you have that illusion of the mountains being closer to you than they really are. Again, it's a personal preference of what you really want to shoot. So in terms of settings, I've tried to make this really simple, really basic, the way I understand it. So for beginner photographers, hopefully this isn't too technical, but I would recommend, if you want to dial up your photography a little bit, definitely shoot in manual mode. It's a mode, it's a main setting on your camera. There's a knob on the right side on most cameras, and you can switch to manual, auto, panoramic, video, aperture priority, things like that. I would say turn that to manual and start shooting in manual mode. It's a way for you to have more creative control over the three most important settings, which are the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So what are these things? When I started out with photography, I was so confused. It's almost like I felt like I just had a really, really hard time understanding what these concepts were. And the only way that I could understand, and I'm a very visual person, I had to go out and shoot. And that's the only way I could grasp what these were. So if you still don't understand what this stuff is when I go through this, don't worry, neither did I. So aperture, okay, I'm trying to make it as easy as I can. With aperture, you're basically controlling depth of field of your image. So how much of the image is in sharp focus? I'm just gonna show you an example, right? So in this example, I shot this with the aperture of 1.8. And what I mean by that is I was shooting at this number. I was shooting at this small number because I was trying to create a really shallow depth of field, which means a blurry background. I didn't really care about the grass in the background. I didn't want to show that, oh, okay, this animal was in a forest. I wanted to show the animal. So I wanted to blur out the background as much as I could and focus 100% on the details around this animal. If you use a larger f-stop number or aperture, you're looking at like an f16 or like, whatever, f18, f20, that's what you can use to create sun flares. So I showed you guys in this shot, I was using an aperture of say f18, f17, f16 to get this shot. And most of the rest of my images also pretty crisp. All right, so that's the aperture. I'm just giving you kind of like the very basic definition of it. So you might want to create a blurry background and just focus on your subject and make your subject stand out from the background, or you may want to capture both the foreground and the background in sharp focus. Like I could have just made the grass also really visible and in focus. That is also okay. But shooting in manual mode gives you that choice. All right, so this is another example of creating that shallow depth of field with a small f number. So I use like an f-stop of, again, 1.8 here to just focus more on the animal and less on what's happening in the background. So you can kind of see all the beautiful details here and not get distracted by like a leaf or branches or whatnot. Shutter speed. So what exactly is shutter speed? All right, I just knew that I wanted to master shutter speed because I was obsessed with getting shots like this. I wanted to create water that looked silky smooth. I'm still learning and I'm still practicing, but this is like a very basic example of how you can use shutter speed to get these kind of shots and kind of level up your photography. You could just take the shot without making this water silky smooth. It would just be a bunch of waves and then you can just photograph the bridge as it is. But you could dial it up a notch if you learn to really manipulate your shutter speed, where you can kind of slow down the motion of the waves to create this effect, or you could freeze action without a blur, like in this photo. right? You're kind of freezing the twirling and the dress. There is no blur here. And that's what you call using a high shutter speed. So in this example, I use a shutter speed of 1/2 a second or longer to create this effect. The longer the shutter speed, the more silky the effect. You can even make the waves of an ocean look like a low lightness. That's how amazing some of these shots can be. So here I'm kind of using shutter speed. This is in Europe, in Prague, to kind of experiment. This was actually a train that was passing by. So very much like what I did here with the water, I kind of applied similar settings here to kind of slow down the movement of the train. So ISO is the third setting that's really important with manual settings that you want to manipulate and control. It's basically what's going to brighten or darken your photo. As you increase your ISO, your photos are going to become brighter. Now, if you're shooting in low light, and by that I mean more like evenings when the light is fading, I frequently find that I'll need a higher ISO to properly expose my photo. But if I go too high, my photo is gonna, end up being a little grainy. Maybe that doesn't matter if you're just doing this, if you're just taking photos for your memories, or, even if you're just taking it for Instagram or social media, or wherever, it's fine. But if you're trying to print photos, if you're trying to, publish, or you want to be a professional photographer, you have to really understand how these 3 settings work so that you can find the right balance. I'm not sure that there's any specific rule, but the more you practice with these settings, the more you'll understand what to use and when. So for wildlife shots, again, you want to make sure your camera is ready. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a shot like I did with the orangutan on that first photograph that I showed you, because animals, wildlife are constantly moving. So you kind of want to make sure you're ready. Your settings will really depend on a lot of different things, on what the light is like, what the animal is doing. These are just some general tips. They're by no means all encompassing, but it's just kind of like some guidelines. If you're gonna, head out on a safari tomorrow somewhere, kind of want to just do some research on some settings and kind of play around with your camera to just make sure that you understand how to use your settings when you're shooting wildlife. I kind of like to use continuous mode also because I can take several shots at once. That helps me to kind of make sure that I have a good chance of getting the right shot, especially with something like wildlife where the animals are moving around. Street photography, again, you're really looking to, for a shutter speed where you want to make sure that it depends again on what you're trying to capture on the street, what people are doing. Are you trying to capture movement, what the lighting is like? That will kind of define what your shutter speed and your aperture are as well. So for landscapes, again, it's really a personal preference. You might want to have everything in focus from the foreground to the background. You might want to just focus generally in the middle of the frame, right? If you're shooting in low light, like sunset time, you'll probably need a slow shutter speed to make up for the quickly fading light. And for that, you'll need to invest in a good, sturdy tripod. But usually when you're doing landscape photography, if you're just, pointing and shooting and you're trying to capture this big scene, you're going to be going with like an F number that's a little higher because you're just trying to get an overall crisp image. So for this shot right here, I kind of had a high F number. I had an F22 because I was trying to get the sun flare through the keyhole. This was shot in Big Sur here in Northern California. And this was basically my aperture because I wanted to slow down the movement of the water to give this silky effect. I shot this in Vermont during fall a couple years ago. I don't think I tried to blur out anything. I just literally wanted to capture the entire landscape and I wanted to show all the gorgeous colors. And therefore, this is exactly how I shot it. I just focused here in the middle and that's what I did. So tripod recommendations, in case you're looking for something. I think my friend Mary Elena, she might be on this call. One day my old tripod broke. And I called her up in a panic and I said, oh my God, like, I don't have a tripod. I know we're going on a shoot today. I don't know what to do. And she was like, go get the Peak Design. It's amazing. I'm like, okay. And they had a store in San Francisco. So I went and I asked them about it. I checked it out and I got the lightest option and it's been amazing. I have zero complaints. It's easy to, put your camera and take it off. It's also rated the best overall for travel right now. Although here are a couple of other brands. I know you know some of the advanced intermediate photographers out there. You might have some of your recommendations, would love to hear them. But in terms of, for example, if you're looking for like the best budget tripod, the Me Photo Backpacker S is also a great option at just $100. Some of the things you want to consider with a tripod is, you want it to be sturdy. Last thing you want is for that tripod to be knocked out by the winds and then have your, camera fall, your lenses shatter or whatnot. Not a good scenario. And in San Francisco, the wind is just so unpredictable that I just didn't want to take a chance. And I decided I'm just going to go for the Peak Design. So that's pretty much my talk today. I want to thank you all for attending. And these are a couple of treks that I'm leading. There's going to be one in Idaho end of April over at the Sawtooths. It's going to be a backpacking trip and a photography trip, and then the Annapurna Base Camp again in October of this year. So if you're interested at all, email me. There's my email at the bottom. But yeah, I just really loved sharing my journey, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well.
Oh my gosh, this was amazing. I'm sure I can speak for everyone that I am so inspired. I had to laugh along the way because you said some of the photos you thought were terrible, but oh my goodness, your photos are incredible. I think I wrote in there, definitely magazine worthy. I know you have been in some before. So thank you so much. And those tips, oh, I feel like I need to keep rewatching this because those tips are amazing. So thank you so much, Preethi. Amazing, amazing. We had tons of questions come in. You touched on some of them, but I will just go ahead and ask. So for those of you, I know we are a little bit past the hour. Hopefully you can stay on and to get these questions answered. But if you aren't able to, you can feel free to just connect via the website or Instagram links that I put in the chat box. But okay, so my first question, kind of broken them down into a couple specifics. And this one had to do with the apps that you use. And so do you have a specific app for photos that you recommend that we use on our phones for taking travel photos? And I know Marilena already recommended photo pills, and I think you mentioned that. Is there?
Yeah, the photo pills is more for, kind of trying to predict the path of the sun or the moon. If you're trying to shoot, you want to see if the sun or the moon is going to come in through like one of the windows of the bridge, or if there's a particular composition that you're going for. That's what photo pills is for. So I'm not sure if the question is about, are there particular apps to use on the phone for editing or for layouts?
Why don't you talk about both, if you don't mind, if you have recommendations?
No, definitely. I think one of the apps that I use on my phone is actually Preview. That's more of a layout app. It just kind of lets me see all the photographs that I want to, use on social media. It helps me lay it out, helps me kind of look at my grid online and just see how I want to lay out all my photography. But some of the editing tools or apps that I like using on my phone is Snapseed. That's a really nice tool. It's easy to use. You can do a lot of different things with your photo. You can kind of change the perspective. If you've got a crooked photo, I'm not talking about just straightening it, but if the perspective is off, you can actually fix that in Snapseed. So I kind of like that. But those are the apps that I use currently. I don't think there's anything else that I'm using right now.
Okay, perfect. And that was actually a question someone was curious about if you use Snapseed. So great for recommending that. And then we had quite a few camera specific questions. I know you touched on most of those. So for all of you on the call, if you did not get your question answered specifically about that, just rewrite it. But so Anjali, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, was curious what DSLR camera you would recommend for a beginner or intermediate level photographer.
So I put that up on my screen, right? I did, that's some of the magazines and the photography journals, recommend those cameras that I put up on the screen. So for example, the Sony, they say the Sony RX100 it's a small point and shoot, but they say it's really beginner friendly. It also has 4K video. But if you're looking for a budget travel camera, the Panasonic Lumix is great. The Olympus EM10 is also fantastic. It's only like $370. I went with Sony back in the day, the Sony a7000, which is, I think, a great beginner-friendly camera. Even the 6600, the Sony 6600 is also great, because the Sony was, I think, when I did my research, I had the Canon, and the Sony was supposed to be lighter. It's supposed to be smaller, because it was a mirrorless camera, right? My Canon was not. I had a very old school Canon. These days you can find mirrorless Canon cameras as well. So that's why I switched over to the Sony, because for travel, I just wanted a smaller, lighter camera. And so I still would recommend Sony for a beginner as well, but even the Nikon and the Canons are also great. Check out the Canon Rebel T7. It's a great budget travel camera, and it's a great for beginner as well.
Okay, perfect. And then I know you touched on this as well, about the lenses you recommend, but Tegan was curious. So they have a 50mm, and they're curious if they should possibly look into getting a telephoto lens. I know they're quite pricey. So what's your recommendation?
Yeah. I would not. I honestly didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I just was looking at photographs, and I was pouring over Nat Geo and TNL and Google and Instagram. And I was like, oh my God, I want that photo. Oh my God, I want this photo. And I just went lens shopping, right? I don't regret it, because the compression lens, the 70-300 is something that I love. I really love that kind of perspective. I love taking those kind of photographs. It does something to me. It creates excitement. And I love that feeling. And I feel like a lot of people like those types of photographs too. Every time I post something like that, or I've shot something like that, I mean, both my photos that I recently shot with the 70-300 won awards in a photo competition. So I'm able to create impactful photos with the 70-300. And because I'll tell you all a secret, I don't really know how to use my 16-35 wide angle effectively. I am learning, but that is why I will say that I wouldn't just go out there and buy that telephoto lens. It really depends on what appeals to you, what you want to shoot. Look at photos, look at what appeals to you, look at other people's photos, and then kind of decide what your style is, what you want to focus on before you go out there and drop a whole bunch of money. By the way, also get used lenses. It's not a bad thing. These things are really pricey. So think about it a bit, Google, research, see what you like, what you want to photograph, and then decide where you want to spend your money.
Perfect. That's a great tip about the used lenses as well. And then I know you touched a little bit on the lenses that you recommend, but do you have a specific go-to lens, maybe one or two that you bring on your travels?
Yeah, my go-to is the 70-300 and the 16-35. For me, the 70-300 makes a lot of sense because I'm a hut-to-hut trekker. I do a lot of hut-to-hut trekking around the world. And when I was at Annapurna Base Camp in Nepal, pre-pandemic, I needed that 70-300 because I was trying to capture those gigantic mountain ranges. And that's what I needed. The 16-35 for me, it's great when you've got like foreground, like flowers that you can use to kind of frame and then still show the mountains that are far away. But in order to have that visual impact, for me, the 70-300 has proved really helpful. But my recommendation, if you're looking for an all-purpose lens, is the 24-70 with the f-stop that goes down to 2.8. Look into that because I think you'll be very happy with it. It's a very versatile lens. I mean, it's great for travel photography.
Wonderful. All right, so switching a little bit, and just your opinion, do you think iPhone photos are as comparable to DSLR photos?
Well, I will tell you this, there are a lot of iPhone photographers out there, and you just have to go on Instagram and look for them. They are amazing, 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 amazing. You just have to know how to use some of these techniques. And it's also about what you're photographing, right? Like if you're gonna go to Death Valley, you've got these amazing sceneries like artist palette, like painted sand dunes and mesquite sand dunes. You could do a great job even with your phone there. But if you're going to go to a place that's not as visually impactful, your phone can only do so much. So a lot of this also has to do with the type of scenery that you're photographing. But an iPhone or a phone, all said and done, can only do so much, right? You have to get creative with it. And when I talk about go online to Instagram and look at some of these iPhone photographers, they get creative. So you've got to train your mind to think like that and to get creative with your angles and have these little camera tricks and stuff to come up with like that kind of unique compositions and stuff like that. And then a lot of it is editing. So you can still take great photographs with your phone. You don't need a fancy camera.
So I think this might answer the next question. So I did see in the comments, some people were talking about the iPhone 12 Pro. Can't remember if that's the newest one, but I know that takes fantastic photos. But someone was asking if the iPhone Plus 8 is a decent camera or iPhone to take for travel photos. But I think you answered that in just saying, as long as you kind of know the tips and tricks with what to do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, I showed that Morocco photo in Chef Shawan. It was taken on an iPhone, and I have 11 then? I think I was using the 8 Plus then. So you can still take a great phone if you kind of follow some of these tips that we talked about, like look for those leading lines, look for framing opportunities. I think 8 Plus even has that portrait mode where you can turn that on and then frame those flowers and blur out the background. You can even slow down water using your phone. So in other words, you could take a long exposure shot of a waterfall or whatever with your phone. Not with the iPhone 8 Plus, but I think in the iPhone 11 versions, I think, yeah, you're able to do that. So there's an actual long exposure setting, and there's a little bit of a trick to it, but yeah, you can take it. You don't even need your camera. So it doesn't perform that well in low light necessarily when there's sunsets and you're trying to, capture those type of shots. It's not going to do great, but for travel photography, if you're just trying to capture stuff for your memories, it's great. You don't need to have a fancy camera. And if you don't want to print, then I mean, even iPhone photographs have been printed, right? So it's possible.
Yeah, and every year it's just expanding on what their capabilities are. So it's amazing. Okay, so we're going to switch a little bit to photo specific questions. We have a lot of that. So our first question is, should we take photos in both portrait and landscape? Because I know for portrait, a lot of times we have to use that for Instagram, landscape maybe for the blog. So what do you recommend? And do you maybe take the same shot in both directions?
Yeah, I actually take the same shot in both directions. I will definitely take landscape because landscape is also what a lot of magazines like to publish, and you want to keep that opportunity open if that's something that you want to do eventually. And then you can also crop your landscape shots later on. If you've shoot it wide enough, you can always crop it when you're editing for Instagram. So don't just take vertical or portrait photographs. Definitely make sure you also capture landscape photography as well.
Okay, perfect. And then this kind of goes along with that. So Joe was asking if you take also multiple layouts, for example, square, 4x3, 2x2, or do you tend just to do portrait and landscape?
I do just portrait and landscape, and then I use the cropping tools. Snapseed has that crop tool where you could just, edit it to whatever you need to. But I haven't really had to edit it to any other number. It's just if I take it in vertical, in portrait and in landscape, then I can just use the portrait for Instagram, and that's all I really need.
Okay, wonderful. And then you touched on this a little bit, but if John and Jennifer, if you're still on the call, I know you both asked about how do you blur part of the picture and how do you shoot into the sun. So if you need more specifics about that, please feel free to message right now in the chat box and I will get that answered. But I know you touched a little bit on that. But we did have a question on do you use a filter for the sunburst or can you get an effect without that?
No, you don't need a filter for the sunburst. If that's just really how it is. If you put your F number at like that 16 to 22, you can get that sunburst. It's pretty cool. I used to think it was super complicated, but it's not. You don't need a filter of any kind for that at all.
Cool. I want to try that. Amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. David had a question about how much post-shot editing do you do and what editing program do you use?
Yeah, I do edit my photos and I use Lightroom and a combination of Photoshop. I use Photoshop primarily to kind of give some of my photos a very dreamy effect, like the Enchanted Woods photo. I don't know if you all remember that with the little sun flare, but that was shot with something that was edited with something called the Orton effect in Photoshop. And that just kind of gives your photo this kind of dreamy look, if that's kind of the story that you're trying to tell. But otherwise, I primarily use Lightroom for editing, and I don't like to enhance too much, but I still like to bring out some of the colors where it makes sense.
Okay, I actually have a question in regards to Lightroom. So I have that on my phone for just my, mobile photos. So I'm assuming you use that on your computer. Do you also use that on your phone for any of those iPhone shots?
You can use it on your phone, and I used to, but the iPhone 11 and 11 Plus, they've just gotten so good. I can just click on the photo, click edit, and you know how they have those settings down there to edit? I just use that to edit and it's fine. So I don't even bother going into Lightroom on my phone, but you can. The mobile version is fantastic, and you should be using it if you're going to use it for something more than Instagram. I guess you could, but for Instagram, yeah, it depends on your palette and how you've got your feed organized. If you're consistently editing, just using the iPhone settings, the editing settings, you're fine. But if you've consistently been using Lightroom on your phone, just stick with that.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, and then Allie was curious, do you ever take photos in the night? And then if so, what's your recommendation for that?
Yeah, I've just actually started, as of last year, I started experimenting with that, with astrophotography. It's not something that I do often. It's a little tricky in terms of the focus. You have to shoot manual, and you've got to turn that focus to infinity. That's the biggest tip when it comes to shooting astrophotography. And your f-stop settings are usually, I believe they're more like an f15 and higher. You're trying to kind of get a crisp shot. I don't know if, other than that, I can't quite think of any other settings. The most important for astrophotography, honestly, is the ISO, because you don't have any light, right? So you're operating with very low light, and that's where you want to turn up the ISO number. So normally you want to shoot with an ISO of say 100, 200, 300 when the sun is out. If it's cloudy or if it's evening and if the sun is setting, you're going to dial up that ISO to like, I don't know, 500, 600 to kind of get a little bit more light in. If you're doing astro, that ISO number might be going up to more like 1500, 2000, 4000. Again, keep in mind, the higher you go with that ISO, your photo is going to get a little bit grainier. You could probably fix that in editing. And then there's aperture and shutter speed to manipulate. But yeah, that's the biggest setting, honestly, to really keep in mind when doing astro. So I'm hoping to get into it a little bit more right now because there's a lot of Milky Way skies going on, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, great tip. That nighttime shots has always been so difficult for me. So
Yeah,
those tips for me, it's hard. But again, I'm a very big beginner, so I have a lot to learn. All right, so we've actually had tons of questions come in about taking pictures of people on the street. So when you're doing these street photography or shooting in other public places, how do you handle the reluctance of many people to be photographed? And do you ask them permission first? And if so, then how do you take that natural looking shot?
yeah. So I think in Vietnam, when I shot those photos on the street, I had my zoom lens, which was great. So that's the other reason the 70 to 300 comes in handy, is because you could be standing way across the street and then taking those photographs, and no one really knows you're taking them, right? So they don't get offended and they don't like yell at you. But if you're going to countries like Central Asia, you're going to Uzbekistan, it's a Muslim country, you got to be careful. Their religion doesn't really necessarily invite their culture. Again, it's not so much religion as it is the culture. They're a little bit more nervous about it. They're not used to it. And you don't want to go up there and just kind of, shove a camera into their face because you want to get your, portrait photography, right? So ask them. For me, it was really easy because, as you saw, everybody was so friendly and they wanted to be heard and seen. And that's what it's all about. It's about how you approach them. And sometimes after I take the photo, I will show them like, here's the photo. And they're so happy. So I will ask, and if they are reluctant, which they have been before in parts like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, a lot of people just said no. In Morocco, again, a lot of people said no. So I just didn't take it. So you just be respectful and say no, because it's not the culture. They're not used to photographers or, people taking photographs of them. A lot of their lives are private. And you also want to be very careful about, in some of these Muslim countries, photographing women, because some of the older women who are observing the cultural traditions tend to cover themselves, and taking a photo of them is a big no-no. So especially in countries even like Morocco, you just want to be really careful. I know you're trying to get your shot of those two women, walking in front of the mosque. It looks really beautiful, great for street photography, but understand the cultural nuances, and refrain from doing that. So do a little bit of research depending on what country you're going to. It just really depends, but you wanna just be sensitive and always ask, always ask.
I think that's really important. And someone just mentioned in the chat that, sometimes people might say no, but then when they see the picture,
Yeah.
they love it afterwards and might give you the permission. So
yeah.
And then this actually leads me into another question that Faye had in terms of when you're shooting children, do you get parental consent? And same thing as if you're shooting maybe into someone's home, do you have to get permission from that homeowner? Or even let's say if it's a business, how do you handle those situations?
Sorry, repeat that again. I missed that first part.
Okay, so the first question is when you're shooting children, photos of children, do you get parental consent? That's the first one. Then I'll ask my second one next.
I haven't really shot too many children. And if I do, like the one that I showed you in Uzbekistan, I did not get parental consent for that. It was like me walking on the street with my friends and, they're standing right there. And I just took that shot. Again, Uzbekistan was very different because people were friendly. They would literally come up to me with their child and give me their child to hold, and I could cuddle them. I think in America, if I try to do that, even pre-pandemic, they'll be like, what the heck are you doing, right? Like, you know how many times I wanted to cuddle cute babies in America and I've had to refrain myself? Like, I can't just go up to somebody, but in Uzbekistan, you can. They'll give you their child to cuddle. That's just how it is. Or maybe that's how they are with Indians, because their affinity towards India and that proximity towards that culture is so huge. But I would say with children, be careful again. Different countries operate so differently. There's this issue of privacy here in America, which doesn't really exist in other countries, but then there's other cultural nuances. So again, ask. If the parents are around, just ask. It doesn't hurt. What's the worst they're gonna say? No, and then you just move on to somebody else who say yes.
Yes, so I think the key is just ask permission. If you're shooting people, children, or even into a business or a homeowner situation, just ask. So that's the best thing you can do. All right, so we've got a question from John asking about your recommendation on photo software to save pictures. So I know you touched a little bit on that, but do you have a specific thing in terms of saving versus manipulating the photos and editing them?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Before I edit them?
So let's say, do you have a specific area that you save pictures, or do you just save them in your editing software?
Yeah, what I do is I first look at all my photos in my hard drive, not my hard drive, on my disk, my SD card. And so I just look through all those photos. I kind of see if there's something that I like in particular. I'll bring that into Lightroom. I'll edit it, and then I'll take it out and I'll save it on my external hard disk. So I don't typically bring all my photos from my SD card into Lightroom for editing. I know different people do this differently, but I just sometimes shoot so much content, and I'm never organized enough to get everything out. And so this is kind of what works for me. I just go in there, I see what's good, what I might want to edit, and I take a couple of those photos, bring it into Lightroom, and then I save it after that. So that's my process.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, we've got just a couple more. You guys, everyone on the call, you've had such amazing questions. So I'm trying to get through all of them. So thank you for your patience. So Anjali, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, was curious how much you edit your pictures and what your thoughts and philosophy are on that.
Yeah, I think over time, I think social media has sort of just maybe made this a lot worse in some ways, in the sense that we've seen very edited photos. We've seen all kinds of sky swaps, and where the photo is so unreal that when I go to that destination, I don't see anything like that. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I thought this is how, you know, Casablanca looked, and it looks nothing like that in real life. So how much of it are we responsible for? Is photography an art? And as an artist, do I get to do whatever the hell I want? It's not my responsibility to depict it the way that it is, or is it? I don't know. I think it's a personal preference. I don't know what the professional photographers feel about it because there's so many different types of professional photographers. I think for me, as a travel, you know, photographer, I want to show places most often as how they are. Rarely will I manipulate that to add a sky or something, unless I'm experimenting and I'm doing it for a local photo competition. Photo competitions, they don't care. They're judging based on technique and all this other stuff, right? But for the most part, for travel photography, I just want to show people this is how it is, with a little bit of editing, bring out the colors just a little bit more. Even that sometimes I feel like such a fraud. I'm like, God, why am I bringing out the colors? Why can't, remember back in the day when social media was there, Instagram was there, and we could just like post things without any editing? Like, I don't think so many of us knew how to use Lightroom or Photoshop or Snapseed. I don't even know where Snapseed, if it was even there back in the day. We could just post photos. It was just raw shit that we took. What you see is what you get. But now it's all like, I'm, you know, complicit in this as well. It's all highly curated. Some of it is very edited. Some of it looks like, you know, absolutely, I don't know. I think I have conflicting views on this. I think what sells and what publishes are sometimes those, I think what sells and what gets published are really photos that tell a good story. Let me put it that way. So I think you don't have to overly edit and you don't have to manipulate. I think you can tell a great story with very simple photographs.
It's so true. I love that philosophy. All right, so this is a great question from Kay. So do you travel alone or do you always travel with someone based on your methods?
A lot of the times I travel alone and I use my tripod to take those photographs. And then sometimes if I'm with a friend or another travel photographer, then I will compose a shot and have them take it for me. The thing with photographers also, when you're traveling with them, it's great because they know how to handle the camera and they get it. But the way they want to compose a shot is very different from the way you see the shot. So if you want to become a good photographer, you know, there's different kinds, right? If you're doing this for Instagram, for example, and you want to take travel photographs where you're like the person in front of the destination, you know, the whatever you're trying to take, and you want to be in the shot and you just want to have someone take those shots for you, yeah, sure. And if the other person has ideas on composition, great, even better. For me, I think the goal is also I want to become a better photographer too. And so sometimes I can't take certain shots with my tripod. And if I give it to somebody who's with me to take that shot, I still want to compose it because it's my vision that I want to see translated. I just need you to click that button. And I can't do that with a tripod sometimes because of what I'm trying to capture. So yeah, it just really depends.
Okay, great. That makes sense. So do you have a limit to the number of photos you take in one scene, just in case that photo didn't come out the right way, or do you just take a couple?
When I first started out, I would just take a bazillion photos because it's digital and you can do that. And over time, it got so overwhelming. And I realized like, oh my God, I'm taking the same photo over and over again. Why? I'm obsessively staring at the same thing and I keep taking the same photo. I marginally shift my composition a teeny weeny bit, my position a teeny weeny bit, and then I take 10 more. What am I trying, like, what am I doing? It's the same photograph, right? So over time, I'm training myself now is when I go someplace, study and scout the area, think for a second, what is the story that I want to tell? What do I want to compose? Position my lens, take one shot, take a look at it. If it's not good, maybe take a couple more, and that's it. Stop just like taking a bazillion shots, you know? I'm trying, that's my philosophy. That's what I want to get to, is take my shot and walk away. I don't want to stay there for like 10 hours taking the same thing over and over and over. On the other hand, when I have done that, I end up with some phenomenal stuff because over those 3 hours, the light has changed. You know, the sun flare goes from here to there and it creates a beautiful glow through the canopy of the trees. And then you get an amazing composition. So it just depends.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just depends on your timing, where you are, how much time you have at that moment. So it's true.
Yeah.
All right. So this, let's give if you can give a short answer, this could be a whole different route, but we were curious how you get into a travel job using travel photography.
When they say travel job, what does that mean? Like,
I would say Manjuma, if you're still on the call, maybe you can write that in the chat box. But my assumption is just when you have these beautiful photos, how can you then turn that into a career?
yeah, I think you can definitely do that in a couple of different ways. You could work for a company to create product photography. I know a girlfriend who's a part-time photographer, and she's interviewing for a company to take photos of their products. That's what her job is, for marketing purposes. So that could be a really cool way to take great photographs, if you like taking product photography. Or you could freelance for magazines. It's a lot harder to do, but if you're really good, you could take photographs start with your local area first. So if you're like living in San Francisco, for example, try and approach some areas locally, try to get some coverage there, try to see what kind of photos those magazines or publications are using, what kind of stories they feature with those photos, and try to like take photos like that. You could also work with tourism boards like I do, work with hotel properties, and take photos for them. I had a girlfriend pre-pandemic who used to take photos of $1 million properties. She used to travel around the world taking photos of $1 million properties. That was her job. I was like, wow, I don't even know that job existed. I want that job. But honestly, I don't know how to take amazing photos of hotel properties necessarily. So it just depends what you're good at. If you're good at landscape photography, there's so many landscape photographers out there. You're going to have to really stand out. And it depends on what kind of pay you're looking for, but if it's something on the side that she wants to do, then there's different ways that you could kind of get a job. It's hard. It doesn't pay you well if it's full time. It's tough, as I'm sure if there are any professional photographers here, I'm sure they can tell you that, but yeah, it's tough, which is why I haven't quit my job, my full-time job yet, to do this 100% full-time, because I don't know how to get paid that much.
Right, it's tricky, definitely. It's a phenomenal hobby you have, that's for sure. So I think you should be paid a fortune for your photos.
Well, me and everyone else is doing this. There are so many amazing photographers out there, and I'm just, I'm nowhere near them, right? I'm just an amateur myself. So it's like you can just imagine the competition that's out there. But yeah, I think if you do it because you love it and you do it just to learn and get better, you just never know what doors will open up for you. Like, who would have thought, like just a year ago, that I'd be like, Erica would have said, oh my God, can you come, teach a photo class? I'd have been like, no, I don't know anything about photography. You never know. Who would have thought I'd win a photo competition? Never in my life would I thought I would have win first place for 2 photos.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, you just have to do what you love and doors will open because of that. As long as you're passionate about it, you can't go wrong because you're having fun doing it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Love that. All right, so 2 technical questions. So what do you do about distortion on wide angle lenses?
There is a thing, a little box in Lightroom called lens profiles. I do it so automatic that I can't remember the name. It's called lens profiles, I think, and you just go out there and click it and it'll kind of correct that distortion for you. I tried sort of eliminated while I'm shooting sometimes. I try not to shoot it at a very wide angle. I try not to shoot it at 16 mm, but sometimes it does happen. And I often use, that's actually the first thing I do in Lightroom is I go to lens profiles and I click that to eliminate any possible distortion.
Okay, wonderful. All right, this one, I don't understand, but you will. What is the micro 4/3 equivalent of the 2470 and the 7300 full frame lenses?
Those are full frame lenses.
So they are? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then that answers the question.
No, it doesn't. What is the micro 4/3 equivalent of those lenses?
Micro 4/3. What does that mean?
Like I have a Panasonic Lumix micro 4/3 mirrorless camera.
Oh, so you want to know what lens is the equivalent of that in the Panasonic?
In the micro 4/3, yeah, which is I forget what it's not a full frame lens, it's the other kind.
Crop sensor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can find out for you. Are you looking for the 70 to 300, the equivalent of that, right?
The 7,300 and the 2,470. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can find out for you.
thank you.
And I just dropped again her contact information in the chat box. So you guys definitely reach out via her website, Instagram, for any other questions.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Leslie. No, okay, but I think we got through all of them. I'm pretty sure. If I missed any of your questions, feel free to reach out like I mentioned. But oh my gosh, you guys, thank you for all these wonderful questions. This was so informative. And Preethi, oh my goodness, your knowledge on this matter is incredible. I feel like we need to do a part 2 for all of us and just.
I could just repeat the same thing again, but for part 2, you need to bring a little bit more of an intermediate photographer. As it is, I feel really bad for the intermediate advanced ones because they probably like knew all this and they're like, what is she talking about? We already know this stuff. But I really hope this helped, the beginner photographers kind of just, think about what they can do differently moving forward, just to elevate their photography a little bit. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Like I wasn't born with a camera. I wasn't born around photography, as you already know my background. So I honestly just picked this up and just with consistency and practice, I promise everyone can do this.
And I think, even if you are an intermediate or advanced, I think just hearing the information again just makes you remember how to do it. And it's the basics sometimes that you just have to learn from. So I do not think it was too basic. I think it was a fantastic presentation. Maybe next time we can have everyone bring their camera and do like a how-to or something, right? Because
awesome. Yeah,
we're sitting here thinking, oh, I need to play around with my camera on this. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks for all of you for staying on. I know this was a little bit longer, but there was so much information. So I really appreciate it. I am going to share my screen. I promise I will talk very quickly about some of these things that we have coming up. But for those of you that aren't familiar, I mentioned this earlier about becoming a Patreon community member. You can just click on that link, and for just a few dollars each month, you have access to the event replays such as this. If you missed any info, you can always go back and watch it. And tons of all these other perks. As I mentioned, we have 3 different types of events. So we have these travel presentation style events, and we have one coming up on Thursday, which is the Sustainable Travel Mindset from Katarina and Remy. That should be really inspiring. And then on the 29th, we have Finding Experiences that Maximize Benefit to Local Nonprofits. And then so many more. I think we have them calendared out through July. So definitely head on over to that link and you can check them out and sign up in advance for those as well. And then, as I mentioned, we have these regional happy hours. So these are a little bit different, where they're more informal. Everyone's off mute. Everyone can just chat and get to know each other. And we have 2 this week, one in the Northeast and Texas. And again, these happen monthly, pretty much weekly in different areas throughout the world. So check to see if you have one coming in your area. And if not, just join in on another one and meet some people. And then the third event we have are these book clubs. So we actually do not have one for April. Unfortunately, there was a scheduling conflict for that. So our next one will be on Wednesday, May 5th. And this is with Ralph Potts in terms of his book, Marco Polo Didn't Go There, an incredible book. So if you have time, pick that up and read it and then come. And these book clubs are very informal. Again, you get to ask your questions to these authors, and it's just a wonderful way to meet the authors. That is it, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today and being a part of the community. We love seeing you. It's so much fun to have all of you here and asking these questions and being engaged. And before you leave, I did see, I think Brian dropped this in the chat, but if there were some great tips that were shared also in the chat box. So if you click on those 3 dots, that'll save the chat. Only on desktop. If you're on your phone, unfortunately, it doesn't, but that will save it and you can go back to some of those tips as well. And then make sure you sign up for Preethi's tips that I sent also in the links, and you can have some more info that way. So thank you all again, and we will see you on another event real soon. Have a great night, morning, afternoon. I know people were here from all over the world, so it was wonderful. Lots of travel photos that we're going to see from all over the place. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night where I am. And thank you, Preethi. I can't wait to see what photos you have next.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining.
All right, bye, everyone.